Ark Survival Evolved has been around for a few years now, and if you haven't heard about it or any controversy surrounding it, you probably live under a caveman rock like everybody else in the game. The early access game was originally released in June of 2015, and recently, back in August, was the full release of the game by Wildcard Studios. At first, this game seemed to have a whole lot of potential, and I'm going to tell you right now, the first couple of months over that summer that I had it was probably the best gaming experience for that short period of time. And I actually spent probably more than half of the hours in the game that I currently have right now, which is around probably 450 hours. I was about to say 450,000, but you know, that might be a little bit off. This game really seems to be what kicked off that early access survival game saturation that we see in the market nowadays, with games such as, you know, you have Rust coming out, 7 Days to Die. We've got Next Day Survival, the DayZ, the whole shit show with that. And this game honestly seems like the first large multiplayer online survival game that has actually come out of early access. There's a couple others that have come out, like The Long Dark, but that's a single player focused. And you have games such as Don't Starve and Don't Starve Together, but that's either single player or a small co-op game. Now, they weren't the first to come out with early access games. There was games that came out years before that, but they really were one of the most popular games that had come out at the time that were early access. They had around 80,000 players, and it was at the top of the charts for quite a while in sales and in player base. Now, like I mentioned, it was very good for the first couple of months because you kind of got into this new experience and you were expecting all these bugs and issues, and you kind of got into it with this whole new Ark. Basically opened this whole new world for you. You got dinosaurs and all that shit, and the bugs and stuff, they didn't really matter because you were so excited to do all this new kind of stuff. It did have mixed reviews at first because of a couple issues, but that was only for the first couple of days, and then it kind of moved on to like not very positive, but it was mostly positive. I'm like 74-75% range. But then kind of, you know, months and months down the line, a year down the line, and so on, you started to realize that they were just adding more and more content instead of fixing a lot of the bugs and issues, optimizing the game. Now, how do you really judge if a game is good or not? You could say, well, I enjoy it, therefore it's good, but you kind of have to look from more of an objective viewpoint like I'm going to do in this video. And I found one way that I've heard that seems to be a great way to tell if a game is good or not, and that's, does it respect your time? Now, if I were to talk from a personal experience with this game, I would say not really, but coming from an objective standpoint and seeing how far it has come, I would say sometimes it respects your time, whether that be as an individual or a group, small or large. Now, I'd say there's many games out there that do respect your time that are rewarding for how much time you end up spending in the game, like some games like 7 Days to Die. Rust, you know, there are some issues with Rust, but it does, you know, provide a way for you to have fun in shorter spans of time with friends, as well as games such as Don't Starve and Don't Starve Together, and many games, you know, single player games and multiplayer games like Call of Duty and stuff. They respect your time. You have short games that last for, you know, 5-10 minutes, and you end up getting entertainment and enjoyment out of that short period of time. Now, Ark, on the other hand, it doesn't do as well of a job of that because there's so much grind to the game and so many issues, and it kind of feels clunky at times. And I would say, coming from the objective viewpoint, that it only respects your time when you're with a large group, and as an individual, you're pretty much wasting your time. And with a small group of friends, sometimes you'll succeed and other times you'll have issues with many things in the game. But I will touch on all that stuff a little bit later. And remember, I critique the game because I love the game and I want it to improve. Now, probably the biggest issue with the game has to be the grind, and it pretty much ends up feeling like a chore sometimes. It's a pain in the ass to even build a smaller base. It could take hours upon hours to build a little wooden shack, which is ended up being worthless now with the addition of the Gigasaurus and the Titanosaurs, which can destroy everything up to metal, and the Titanosaur, I believe, can destroy metal itself. So when you end up going to build a base, if you want something that's going to protect you, everything, even up to metal, is going to be worthless compared to some of the alpha tribes that have the Gigasaurs and the Titanosaurs. I went on and tried to build a small metal shack. It took me about an hour and a half. It wasn't too small. It was about 2x3 wooden shack with a 1 height wall. And these alpha tribes have massive metal bases I've asked and read up about take hundreds of hours to build, even with how many people they have. There are some people who even have 1,000 hours dumped into one base. For the start of the game, there's no point in even building the wooden and stone buildings unless you really want somewhere to store your stuff. And even if you do spend all this time to build and to collect all these resources, make yourself rifle armor, it can be all gone in an instant when you come back on and you're dead and all your shit's gone. A lot of complaints from the alpha tribes are also that it ends up being a chore to take care of the base, having to go around, make sure all the turrets are filled, make sure all the dinosaurs are fed, make sure everything's intact, and it could take them even an hour every single day just to check up on stuff. And that's not just me guessing, that's me reading actual reviews from some people who have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 hours in the game who have been part of some of these giant alpha tribes. And on the other hand, you have taming, which can be, yet again, hours and hours and hours to tame one dinosaur. A T-Rex that's level 30, which is about the average level I found on the official servers I was on. It was between either 10 to about even 100 for the base level of some of these dinosaurs. A Rex using regular meat takes about 3 hours with a level 30, and it takes about an hour with prime meat, which is probably what you're going to be shooting for. You also have kibble, which takes a little bit less time, but that also requires you to go out, find eggs, and turn it into the kibble. Now, one of the biggest things you're going to have to remember is that without dinosaurs, you're not going to be able to get done much, and in order to speed up the process of everything else from taming to resource gathering, base building, you're going to need more dinosaurs, but it also ends up being really time consuming in the end. For the most part, a lot of the dinosaurs can make different tasks easier, but you end up having to go out, tame these dinosaurs in order to go tame more dinosaurs. And the larger dinosaurs, like the Gigasaurs and the Titanosaurs, you have no possibility of doing it in a smaller group. It's really only for the alpha tribes. The Titanosaur is a big example. You can't knock it out with narc arrows. You can't use the darts on it. You have to use either rocks from the catapult or cannonballs, which requires you to either trap it in an area and build a little place where you can shoot at it, or you would have to get a Quetzal and mount turrets on it in order to knock it out. And it can starve to death as well. You can't feed it, so all that time that you just invested in it is all gone in an instant. In reality, this kind of goes hand in hand with the respects your time kind of thing. As a solo player on these official servers, you kind of get your ass kicked constantly, and even in a small group, you really aren't able to achieve many of the things in the game. You also need a whole lot of resources for things like rifles. Armor isn't too bad, it's mostly the guns, but base building and taming seems to be the longest time consuming thing in the game. And when you want to go around, ride dinosaurs, explore the island, fight bosses, you end up spending most of your time building a base, trying to defend it, repairing it, and then taming more dinosaurs in order to go do all this kind of stuff. And that's the issue with this game, is it really tells you how you can play. As a solo player on these servers, you're going to have an extremely hard time. You might not even want to bother with it. And as a small group, you're going to be hard pressed to get some of these dinosaurs like Rexes. The Gigo is going to be extremely difficult, and the Titanosaur, I would say, is nearly impossible for groups of 4 or 5, which is normally what I'm in. I've had 6 or 7 people at some times, but it's normally just me and my friends. And I don't really like playing with these larger tribes. I don't like going around doing all these chores, collecting stuff for them, and being told what to do all the time. So it just ends up being me and my friends, and that's how I get enjoyment out of these games. But when they restrict you all the time with how you should play, it really takes away from what you want in a game, and that's you want to enjoy yourself, enjoy your time, and have fun with friends. And this game kind of takes that idea and tells you, well, you have to work for it. And it's not a little bit of work that you have. Like, of course, people who spend 100, 200 hours on a base, they should have something bigger than you, but the fact that they spent 100, 200 hours on this base can be kind of ridiculous. And when you only have a few hours a day to play on these games, like I did at some point with school or with work, you really want to spend that time enjoying it and not grinding for all this stuff. On the other hand, you have the bosses, which are ridiculously hard to get to and fight. You have to go through all these caves, collect artifacts, then you have to go fight certain dinosaurs and take that from them, and you put it all together to go fight a boss, which ends up getting you some kind of resources. You get a trophy, which all the trophies come together, and all these different artifacts and items come together to fight the final boss. And when I went on YouTube, I couldn't find a single person who had beaten the final boss in a legit way without God mode or spawning in all these dinosaurs. When I read up on it, it ends up being that you need so many T-Rexes to even fight the weakest boss, which is the Broodmother on easy, of course, and that you're spending hours and hours and hours and hours just to fight one boss, which ends up being you sitting there on a dinosaur with all your dinosaurs crowded around, just chomping on it the whole time, and there's really no variety in that. Throughout the creation of ARK, the developers took more of a content-based creation view, where they just added more and more content to the game without really fixing too much. They fixed a bunch of bugs, but they ended up adding 2 more bugs for every one that they fixed, and it got buggier and buggier. The content idea was honestly great because they added more and more for people to do. It attracted more people, let's say their favorite dinosaurs now in the game. Boom, they jumped on, and that was kind of the deciding factor for them. But what ended up happening is they weren't tweaking stuff and fixing stuff, so each different update created more and more issues, and eventually the game started to get worse and worse. The optimization was alright, they improved that a bit, but the bugs with dinosaurs, players, bosses, all that kind of stuff was still an issue. So let's use this little analogy to kind of represent what this is. Let's say you're hungry, you want a nice ass sandwich. You get the 2 pieces of bread, you lay them out, you start slapping on meat. You close it and you're like, I don't really think I like this. This isn't full enough. You open it up, you put on more meat. You add some cheese, some lettuce, tomato, and then you add more meat. And then you add more meat, and more meat, and more meat. And then a day or 2 later, you're still adding shit in there. And you go to grab the sandwich, you bite in, and the bread's stale as fuck. Some of the meat is starting to rot. But that center, oh, that's good because that's the fresh meat. And that's kind of how Ark is. They kept adding content and more content, which seemed new and fresh, but eventually it started to get buggy and stale because of all the new stuff they're adding and not fixing the old stuff. Now recently I decided to revisit the game because I didn't want to judge it based on my past experiences before the full launch. I had some friends help me out too, which gave me more than just my own opinion on the game. It allowed them all to experience bugs and let me know about them. And what ended up happening is I ran into a whole lot of little bugs. There wasn't anything too major, but there was still a lot wrong with the dinosaurs. You'd have hovering dinosaurs, dinosaurs that would kind of slide away and keep sliding away from you. The hitboxes that I had issues with way before, where you'd shoot an arrow or throw a spear, it'd get stuck in your enemy, but it wouldn't actually do damage or aggro dinosaurs, of course, was still happening. I threw spears, got them stuck in legs, there was no aggro, nor was there a hit marker. I also tested this on friends and had them run around or chase them around and shoot them, and there would be times where arrows would get stuck and they'd be like, oh, I hate you, and they'd be like, no, you didn't. This can be a huge issue, especially when you're in a PvP fight and that last arrow can be life or death and it doesn't register. Same with dinosaurs, you kind of want to go on that hunting experience, and when you shoot an arrow and it goes into their leg but doesn't actually hit them, you kind of get this detraction from that hunting experience. The AI is still a bit awkward. You can stab some dinosaurs, they'll go into walls, not actually phase into the wall, but they'll run into the wall, then turn, then try to turn away. They'll get stuck within little areas, they won't go around some stuff, they'll run at you, they'll slowly stop and just stare at you for a second. Really takes you out of the immersion of that primal hunt. They still have a lot of issues with the environment. Like I said, I've seen, brontosauruses with their legs floating up in the air like they're climbing up at a rock, but there's really no rock there. And these are a bunch of minor things, but you'd expect them to be fixed, and they really detract from the immersion of the game. Now, I did end up finding a couple major things, like I got stuck in a couple places where I couldn't get out of and I had to die. I got stuck between rocks and little crevices, and also they never fixed the bug from the start that was you'd be able to stab dinos through walls. It's ridiculous that they haven't fixed that. It's been there since day one, and this is a major issue for a lot of players. It can cause death of many of your dinos that you spent hours taming, and your time could just be gone from someone who's be able to exploit a bug. Now, the optimization has improved a whole lot since the start. I could get 30 frames a second on medium before, and now I could play on high with just getting a little bit above 60 frames. Of course, there is a lot of dropping where I would go below, and I have some stuttering issues, but that's probably because I have a little bit older CPU and some lower RAM. I have 8 gigs of RAM. It's not too bad, but I'm not going to attribute that because the rest of my friends have similar graphics cards but better processors and RAM, and they don't really have the stuttering issues, but they still only get around 60 FPS, and they drop below it sometimes. It's not perfect, but it's definitely an improvement over what they used to have. Now, if you look past all the bugs and all the grinding and you kind of look at the core functions of the game, what is really wrong with it? One of the biggest things I would say is the fact that single players and people who are in small groups just aren't able to do anything. And you have these tribes called Alpha. I've heard people call them Giga tribes, but they're really just the massive tribes of the server that pretty much can either make or break your experience. I've been on servers where the Alpha tribes would just go around with T-Rexes and Gigos on the beaches and just destroy anything that they see and go in the forest, and you'd have nothing to do against them. And I've had other servers where they would help you out and even, give you some resources to get started, and they'd kind of protect you from the other tribes that try to be alpha or assholes. For the most part, there really isn't anybody who's coming and challenging them, so you might have a second tribe who claims to be an alpha, but they really aren't. And in the end, you either have to join these tribes to achieve so many parts of the game, like bosses, doing cave raids, raiding other large tribes, and even taming all these huge dinosaurs. Another thing that they decided to add and they thought was a good idea was the ability to transfer items, dinos, and characters. Now the character part I can find fine because it does take a long time to level up your character, but items and dinosaurs, there's been so much talk about people from other servers that they would come over and wipe entire servers of their buildings and people while the population of that server is asleep. From like Australia would attack the North American servers, or European would do the same thing, and back and forth. Also, they're able to store stuff in the towers, and I've had experience with this personally where I had someone who stored C4 in the tower would be able to take it out, go around as a naked, just destroy people's stuff, and they would have no consequences to them, and you would lose all your shit and it would be gone when you got back on. There are some ways to kind of help prevent this stuff, like the alpha tribes would build certain things. You also can have people on at 24 hours of the day, but that's kind of a ridiculous thing to put in there, expecting someone from almost every time zone to come in and to watch this. And yet again, that goes back to the chore thing. I've never experienced another game that has this mechanic, and that's for good reason, and the examples from this game show why it really isn't a good idea to do. Transferring your character, not too bad. You have to start from scratch still, collect all these things, build the base, but just being able to bring everything over and wipe people without really many consequences is a terrible mechanic in a game. The rating in this game is kind of lackluster, with either you wiping someone or them wiping you. I've never really had an even fight. I've had one or two in my experience. The PvP is also a little lackluster. You can slide around, and sometimes it just seems like everyone is on a slip and slide. And with these alpha tribes around, you never want to fight them because they're either completely destroying you or you're afraid of them the whole time. Anything up to metal, like I stated, is pretty much worthless. Stone could be easily destroyed by one thing of C4, which a lot of tribes have easily, and all your stuff can be wiped within an instant with little to no effort. I've done this before. I've went around and blown up stone bases, metal bases with C4, and to be honest, it's really thrilling to be able to just destroy and see what's inside, but really it's such a thin victory, you don't really get anything, there's no meat to that, you don't get to fight anyone, you're just kind of picking on something that can't fight back. And back to the grind thing, it's easy to destroy, but it's hard to build. Like I said, normally the combat is one-sided and you really don't have a chance. There's sometimes where you get into little fights with other people, and that's really fun. Those are the moments that I live for in this game. But if you're coming into this game expecting to be able to play by yourself and be able to get through all the content of the game, then you're coming to the wrong place. Another big topic that needs to be touched on is the new player experience. It's kind of a lackluster thing that they have in the game. You'll spawn at the places that they call easy. There'll be dinosaurs on the beach, alpha raptors I've seen Spinosauruses, Carnos, and you just end up dying 5, 10, 15 times before you can really get a footing in the game, and that's not including the players that can hunt you down on the beaches and just kill you for being alive. There's so much dangers that are in place, and sometimes it might just turn you away simply because the amount of frustration that you'll have at the start of the game. I'm going to be straightforward with you. The prison and capturing system in this game is pretty ridiculous, especially for new players. You could run around with a club and knock people out in 1 or 2 hits even if they have their fortitude higher. Some people dedicate their times and will only upgrade melee damage and speed in order to achieve this. You're also able to lock someone up in a cage, put handcuffs on them, and fill their inventory with too much weight so they can't move, go in their inventory, anything, and you could keep them there infinitely. There is no way to kill yourself in that situation. This can be horrible for new players, and even if you're just someone who's been on there for a while and you're not part of one of these huge tribes, it can completely ruin your experience and make you want to leave a server. I've seen many examples of this, and actually I've been in this situation a couple times where I just had to exit the game and leave and wait a couple hours and hope I come back to be dead, which luckily I did. During its early access time, it actually released DLC. Wildcard decided that this was a good idea. This was probably the biggest issue when it came to money and the development of the game, because people were thinking, why would they devote all these resources to a DLC when the main game is still having so many fucking issues? Now, there isn't really a statement from Wildcard saying why they did this, but they did end up having a lawsuit back in, I believe it was April of the year of the release of the DLC, which cost them $40 million because one of the developers on the team decided to apparently steal some employees from the developers behind Dungeon Defenders. So it wouldn't be that bad if this DLC came out a little bit later and they said they had a separate team working on it. But the fact is, all the evidence kind of points to them using this DLC to soak up the funds that had been taken from them in this lawsuit. And they really ended up putting the burden of all this money on the players. Now you do get something for your money, but the fact of the matter is they took some of their time and resources and put it into the DLC instead of developing the full game. Now let's kind of backtrack to the full release of the game, and there was a lot of people who were pissed off that they decided to double the price of the game. Mainly the reason was this game isn't finished and it had a whole lot of bugs. Now if you want to argue that a game is worth how many hours you put into the game, it's kind of a proportional thing. You could say this game is worth, hell, $100, $200 because you'll be putting so much time into it. But again, we have to go back to, does it respect your time? And if you end up spending an hour every time you get on repairing your base or having to go gather resources for something that happened to you while you were offline, is that time considered wasted or is it time well spent? And from there is where you kind of have to decide where the line is drawn, whether the game is worth it or not worth it. I personally thought the game was definitely worth $30 at the time, but maybe now it's still worth around $30, maybe $40. In the increase of about $30 to the $60 price point, I think it still has too many issues and it needs to work out so many core issues before it's really worth that kind of money. Now, of course, on top of all that, they had to add the $45 season pass, which would end up being about $60 if you bought each pack separately. That includes the Scorched Earth DLC, the Aberration that's coming out. You get basically a map, some new items in the game, maybe a couple of other dinosaurs. And overall, they're just adding more and more cash that you have to spend to get the full experience of the game. And they ended up devoting a lot of their resources into developing this season pass, and when you almost pay the same price as the original game, and you would if you bought each one separately, you kind of have to wonder if they're just trying to milk the game or they actually want to improve it. And just as some final thoughts, I want to let you guys all know I didn't skimp on the research. I actually went into the game, spent hours and hours and hours over the last couple of weeks. I took time not only to just research these things and read up about people's comments, reviews and whatnot, but actually joined some of the larger tribes. I've been in an alpha tribe before and I wanted to get their kind of thoughts and hear what they had to say about the game and their experiences. Some of those ended up being hearing about how many hours they would put, hundreds of hours, even thousands of hours into a single base, how they had people watching dinosaurs at every hour of the day, staying up overnight, doing chores throughout the place. And also how all that was just wiped away by someone coming over through the transfer system from another server and just boom, everything's gone. All those hours were wasted for all the people that were in that tribe. I hope this video helps you make a more informed decision of whether or not you want to buy the game and whether or not it's going to be for you. And for all those who are tuning in and watching, I appreciate the views and I hope you guys have a great day, and leave any feedback that you have in the comments, your thoughts on the game, whether or not you agree with some of the points I made. Now I'm going to leave you guys with some in-game clips of some reactions, thoughts, and some tests that I actually did to see the different hitboxes and all the different kind of stuff, just so I could learn about the game in more depth. And I'll catch you in the next one.
Like, it's literally in your arm right now.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
oh,
it didn't hit you.
It's
in your arm. It's going through your arm into your body
not
right
for
now.
me. Not for me, dude.
That's stupid.
Oh, that's so bad.
See if you can swing or anything.
I can't even throw. That's like, I can do this. Ow. Bitch.
One hit? One
That was
hit?
2 hits.
Oh, I didn't register
No,
the
keep
first
hitting
one
me,
for
keep hitting me, keep hitting me.
More hide from a dodo.
I've got like 40 from a dodo before, and I got so confused.
I'm so confused. Like, I tried to do a parasaur with the next. I got 22 meat and no hide, and I just did one dodo, and I got 10 hide.
Oh god, I'm flying. Okay, I'm back. Yeah, I'm lagging like crazy now. Alright, I'm coming over. Did you harvest that raptor?
I'm harvesting it now, yeah.
You guys want to see the freak show? It's just a bunch of dodos with arrows in their heads, but none of them got damaged.
Still lag spiking.
Oh, okay, we're going on
I
the
got
8th
it, I got
arrows.
it. I got thought. Yeah.
But we were like, we didn't have another berry collector, so we had to sit there for half an hour just gathering berries for it.
Yeah. Kinda sucked.
Beer.
Oh, you're using a spear? Oh yeah, you're
Well,
fucked.
I mean, he's stuck.
Oh, alright. Yeah, I've put like maybe 20 arrows into this guy's head right now.
Alright, he's coming out now.
I can try to come help you out in a sec.
Oh, stick is stuck on the tree. He's going.
Hey, I see you.
Comes at you all tough, and then, let me test that.
So,
Test my thingy. My theory.
Trink or what? Oh,
Oh, dude, that went in between your legs, but instead it hit a hitbox.
it hit me. So
Yeah.
there's
Yeah,
there's no
look down, look
hitbox.
down, look down.
So there's no hitbox porn in this game. That's great.
No. Yo, it's there's an arrow between your legs. It's just hovering as you move.
Hey, where are you at?
Yeah, let Ryan.
Yeah, we're further down.
Is it still good? I'm gonna try to put one under your arm. No, it doesn't.
Oh my god, Shrek, this is gonna look terrible.
Dude, I'm already getting, like, my volume, my music is going in and out and going, like, away.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, dude, I don't know what's
Holy
wrong with the
crap.
music. This happens every time. Like, I've deleted and...
Hitting the stone wall for some reason. I don't know why they get it into that. Oh wow, it's literally right here. You can kill this easily. Can't even hit you. Yeah, they really should have fixed it. Like, that's the first thing they should have fucking fixed. Like, so many people's done it. Oh, that pig is really